All right, well, welcome for anyone joining and logging in. Welcome to Practicing Cyber Hygiene. We have Graham Westbrook here. He is the Director of Intelligence and Content at Living Security. And we also have the CEO, Ashley Rose, joining us. Thank you both for being here today. They're both going to be chatting about cyber hygiene. Now, there's a couple things I just want to point out in the chat function as you're joining. We can field some questions along the way. I know we'll have some stopping points, but then we'll also have a dedicated Q&A at the end. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Graham and get on with the presentation.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tyler. And thanks everybody for joining. Shout out to Capital Factory for putting this on. I think it's such a relevant topic, right? Because we're all thinking about coronavirus and COVID-19 and how it's impacting our society. But what we wanted to talk about also was the cyber hygiene aspect of that. So thank you, Tyler. Thank you, Ashley, for joining as a bit of a special guest here. And yeah, I'm ready to get started. So as for me, my background, I like to say it's a cyber security analyst by trade, intelligence analyst by training, and creative at heart. So it's really all about finding new and emerging threats and turning that into really powerful, relevant training content for real people. So I think you'll have fun with this. We have some funny slides kind of built in here to lighten it up and talk a little bit about cyber hygiene. So first slide. I am not an epidemiologist, okay? But I did want to talk about just a couple quick items for kind of what we're seeing. So COVID-19 is the disease. SARS-CoV-2 is actually the virus. And I put this slide deck together late last week. And at that point, we were talking about how we were going to be on the Italy trajectory unless we flatten the curve. It seems like we're going to surpass that at this time. According to some sources, we've just surpassed 4,000 deaths, unfortunately, and it continues to climb. The CDC has declared it a pandemic. You can see from this lower left a graphic here that it became kind of a pandemic in early March. And this has everything to do with the spread of the disease and not actually the severity. It's a sequence similar to SARS, which was able to be kind of quarantined a few years back. And it's mainly stemming from bats from the Yunnan province. It appears that like the Huanan seafood market was the origination of this disease and that there was some kind of zoonotic leap. I'm not going to get into conspiracy theories on other ways that this might have entered society, but ultimately it sounds like patient zero may have been back in September of last year, actually. And the way that things have gone, they've been kind of able to reverse engineer it back to there. And also noteworthy on this slide, just that healthcare workers, dentists, paramedics, nurses, home health aides, you can see the people who are on the front lines of this. And it's incredible to see their elements of sacrifice throughout. Yes, I'm definitely a bit stressed. And I think a lot of Capital Factory members and accelerator founders and everybody who's kind of tuning in will also think about this. Like from a work perspective, we're all kind of the emotional cortisol levels are higher than usual. And we're also trying to think about how do we secure the perimeter? How do we protect people? If you are interested in getting more data, Tableau has a really, really great site. So just take a quick screen snap or type this into a URL. But they're tracking this every day. And this dashboard's being crowdsourced to allow people to jump in, look at different hotspots across the United States and across the world. And you can just start to see over time how that looks with data visualization. Okay. Some hygiene tips we've been hearing, you guys are well aware. You can see this do the 5 screenshot that I captured is not actually do the 4.5. It's an animated GIF. But just talking about primarily the 5 things that you really need to do to help flatten that curve. We've also seen, social distancing, and that there are some pretty scary estimates for still how many people can get it while we're social distancing. But the point is, there are ways to mitigate overall risk, and that the space in between those curves, the high one and and the one that's a bit flatter is actually less as we continue to social distance, self-quarantine, and practice a lot of these hygiene tips. But what it actually had me thinking about was the fact that we're all now working from home. And so, Ashley, you can probably attest to the fact that our meetings internally have looked a little bit like the graphic on the left. But
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think everyone has internally been making the most of it and had a little fun with it as well. Obviously, you can see here my puppy and my oldest daughter there, Bella, in the background. So I think, if anything, some of the positives that I've seen come out of it is, empathy for people's situations. Like including kids in meetings if we need to be. Half of us are teaching school, while we're working during the day. And so being flexible to people's different work hours has been key as well. And I think we're adjusting really well internally, but would love to hear, during either the Q&A or kind of chat during the Slack channel for Capital Factory, how you guys feel like your companies are adjusting as well.
Yeah, it's been such a significant transition, and I think a lot of people are playing catch up. The good thing is for entrepreneurs and the people who are part of Capital Factory are typically ones that are agile and entrepreneurial spirits, and we're all looking for ways to find new ingenuity, not only to create the kind of products and services that people can buy remotely, like telehealth, telemedicine, pretty much remote SaaS applications, what have you. But there's also ways that we can develop, new styles and new kinds of relationships. And so I'm really excited to kind of dig in to that, not only with Living Security, but here as well. So yeah, we're all trying to not lose our mind, but this is what the new security perimeter looks like. And traditionally, the way that cybersecurity has recommended to the C-suite is like have a strong firewall, kind of build those external walls, create some kind of defense in depth, and just make sure that you're securing these different laptops and desktops across the enterprise. But what happens when people go remote is that you're introducing so many different kinds of security attack surfaces to mitigate. And so risk looks very different, right? So that got me thinking, what are cyber criminals up to in this new remote work playground? And what about cyber hygiene? Okay. What criminals are not doing is a lot of this. And this seems to be the pop culture myth that's perpetuated about what cyber criminals might be doing, as if they're in gloves and balaclavas, hiding in basements somewhere. But oftentimes they look a lot like you and me. And as far as this bottom cartoon goes as well, they're not attempting to steal the internet or hack all the IPs simultaneously. What it often comes down to, and what we see at Living Security, is that it's a people issue, right? And so most organizations ultimately get penetrated with some kind of attack or cyber attack because people can be vulnerable and people can be social engineered. And I think that attack surface doesn't change. And the cyber criminal tactics to do that don't change either, right? They're still trying to prey upon people's emotions. They're trying to betray our trust and make us click on links, especially related to COVID-19. According to some estimates, coronavirus-themed phishing has increased 14,000% in 2 weeks. And you might be thinking, yeah, that's really obvious here, but that kind of scale hasn't really happened with other kinds of themed phishing since, I don't know, like 9/11 or major themed events that are going on to create that kind of uptick in cyber criminal activity. And they're really going after people with charity donations, vishing phone calls, even preying upon this new kind of stimulus package and how to make people think that they're signing up to receive payments when in fact they're transferring their personal information over to some kind of cyber criminal enterprise. So some of the other things that they're doing here are kind of stocking up and digging in. The left image on this screen here it's actually a screenshot from the dark web. And this is looking at how criminals kind of preyed upon the fact that we had this global shortage of face masks. And so they purchased a lot of them, have been putting them in warehouses and selling them to doctors and healthcare professionals at extreme premiums, sometimes as much as 200, 300% more than they were before coronavirus. And so, again, utilizing something that's making people feel vulnerable and utilizing it to turn that into cash. And another thing we see here on the right is that, I've seen a couple funny memes, but with CEOs and CIOs, they've tried to kickstart the digital transformation of organizations for years, but it's really not starting, and it hasn't really started until COVID-19 has started to create that kind of impetus that, wow, we have a completely new security perimeter, and people are going to exploit that differently.
Yeah, I was going to add in something here, but a trend that we've continued to see with our clients is the integration between physical and cybersecurity and digital security. And I think this is kind of front and center of how they're so closely related, and especially the one that you are highlighting here on the left with the face masks, and that they are preying upon, doesn't matter whether it's preying upon fear of loss of, financial money or something that's really valuable to people because it's going to be health and safety risk. People are likely to respond in the same way, and cyber criminals know that. So yeah, I mean, scary times, and I appreciate you highlighting these. I think later on in the slide deck, Graham, you have some more examples of this, but I think we're happy to share what we're seeing and what type of emails that we're seeing coming out, so that the Capital Factory community can be on the lookout for these as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing updates and developments here every single day. So here's just a couple more. Some health-related scams, fake COVID-19 test kits containing toxic substances. We're seeing everything from fake cures to phishing. And, that brings up website scams, even where we're seeing different kinds of domain names registered in the coronavirus or COVID-19 theme. And that is an extreme uptick over the past couple weeks. But something like, coronavirusmedicalkit.com, they'll purchase this, they'll create this as a landing page. Sometimes this is called like drive-by downloads or a watering hole. If you're kind of in cybersecurity circles, but it's a place that looks and appears to be legitimate, but actually tends to download some kind of malware, get you to maybe put in your information and somehow create some legitimacy behind this page. And oftentimes, in this particular case, it's not secure, but as cyber criminals develop more sophistication, we're seeing them add, HTTPS by adding a digital security certificate to these phishing and malicious websites, which means we also need to train and educate our remote users on the things that they should be looking for. We're seeing quite a lot of government and charity scams. It's actually, really depressing the amount of impersonation and spoofing that happens of the World Health Organization, the CDC, to try to get people to do something in the name of medicine or in the name of some kind of policy. We're also seeing malicious apps that launch ransomware. So if you've never heard of ransomware, it's kind of like malicious software or malware, but it's a kind of thing that downloads onto your computer, encrypts all your files, and demands payment to unlock them. And so if you might pull up your phone, you're looking for kind of a COVID-themed medical app or something like that. In this case, a coronavirus tracker. As soon as you download that, you're actually downloading the software that can encrypt all of your files and demand payment for you to unlock your own phone. So these, again, are just a few examples of how cyber criminals are themselves being enterprising and ingenious with this time, And we kind of need to do likewise, in order for us to keep pace and outpace them. Here's just, again, a screenshot from late February, early March of just some of the COVID-19 related domain names that have been created per day. It's incredible, and that spike has since gone way up since I put this slide deck together. We also have some more COVID-themed phishing emails. How to protect your friends. Again, appealing to that emotion on the left side here, and on the right, actually asking for different kinds of cryptocurrency like Bitcoin or Litecoin. Please pay the Bitcoin urgently, just to increase that level of feeling that you have to do this fast. Some other cyber implications, which are actually quite interesting, is that there's been a surge in digital payments, according to the Wall Street Journal. This is to be expected, but it's again changing the attack surface and also the way that we do business, the way that we bank, the way that we go online. In the second bullet here, Russia and China have been using coronavirus as an opportunity to spread disinformation and misinformation about coronavirus, suggesting that the United States has tried to create this as some kind of misdirection for something. And it starts to play on the global collective kind of memory and change the way that people see the virus and how it's impacting them personally. Another thing Russia is doing lately is considering taking their internet offline and creating a Russian intranet to create it almost like a bifurcation of the internet itself, according to these geopolitical fault lines. China is doing what they're calling a splinter net, which is a very fractured version of an internal internet, to take it offline from other organizations, other companies, other countries. In fact, and again, this would absolutely be a watershed moment for people using the internet, because things start to shift. I know the surface web is already kind of 5% of all of the internet itself, the things that we can access through Google. But the deep web, the dark web, and then adding to that different intranets and fractured internets is going to make things even more complicated to find and to create business. And then this bottom bullet here is just some kind of infodemic, kind of a new marketing way to talk about how the outbreak is actually influencing information in the way that travels kind of parallel to this outbreak. Ashley, did you have anything else here?
No, I mean, I think all of this is, spot on. I think when we, obviously with our company kind of approaching it from more of a human focused lens, I think, definitely something to call out is as people are transitioning into an environment that they're not normally working from, they have other distractions. It does, again, lend itself for people getting caught off guard or feeling overwhelmed or just getting into kind of a negative place from an emotional perspective, which again opens up risk. So as much as we're going to talk about actual tactics like VPN and locking your laptop, there's so much that needs to be talked about, just being aware of your emotional state and what you're doing in that state. Should you be opening emails, reading through important things when you're maybe you have your kids running around and you have a million things going on, and how that could up risk. So I'm sure there's a lot more of that in depth in the rest of the slide deck, so I won't go too much from there, but a lot of scary times right now.
Yeah, to your point, overall, to have this sense of healthy paranoia, we like to say that it is okay to be a little bit suspicious, especially if these things are urgent, asking for help, and try to kind of steer clear from what seems to be the prevailing wisdom in the news. So just watch out for that. Cool, now what, right? I think for entrepreneurs and employees, Capital Factory members, we're not looking to do something like this. We don't need a solution where it feels like we're just kind of plugging holes. We need to do something and even share the kind of information with our employees that feels more actionable, more tangible. And so we're going to get into that right now. So our version of the Do the 5 from the hygiene tips that I showed a little bit earlier is the Cyber 5. We've also been kind of kicking around this idea of the 7 deadly sins of work from home. But nonetheless, there are like actionable things that we can do and share those bits of wisdom with our users and employees to secure that new security perimeter. So number one, we're going to talk about connecting to trusted Wi-Fi. We're going to talk about using a VPN and what a VPN is and what that means. We're going to talk about locking, storing devices when not in use, especially around strangers or family members who might be in the house during this time. Keeping work data on work devices, and reporting COVID-themed scams. It actually allows the enterprise or your business to be able to kind of pull those emails out from other people's inboxes when they are reported in time. The bonus is just talking about updating devices and changing default credentials on IoT devices you may have at home. So let's talk about the first one here, connecting to trusted Wi-Fi. What you do not want to do is try to connect to a neighbor's Wi-Fi, public Wi-Fi. I know we have a shelter in place here in Austin, Texas right now, but trying to connect to even an apartment complex or a community Wi-Fi actually opens you up to additional threats. When you're connecting, you can actually see if it says WEP, WPA, or WPA2. Sometimes it'll say open or secure. Typically, when you connect to some kind of Wi-Fi SSID or hotspot, it'll ask you, do you want to make not only your computer discoverable, but are you okay with this being a public or a new Wi-Fi hotspot? And we absolutely recommend that that answer be no. And so some good and secure alternatives are here on the left. If you've heard of a MiFi device, this is something you can set up if you don't have internet readily available at home. It allows for up to 10 devices to connect to it and has really high throughput where you're not going to get throttled and you are going to be able to access the internet fairly fast and a lot more securely than a neighbor or a public hotspot. We also have home Wi-Fi, of course, something that you trust, something you're connected to. And we'll talk on the next slide about how to even increase that security even more. Kind of a lower alternative here, but something that's still on the left side is your LTE and creating a mobile hotspot if you do need that in a pinch. Again, if you do hit certain data thresholds with your mobile provider, they may throttle the speed, but the security would be more than the alternatives on the right side of the page. Does that make sense? Yeah. So using a VPN is kind of the next on the list here. A VPN stands for a virtual private network. And what you're actually trying to do is to get your internet to connect to your work internet. Or in the case of just an individual or a small business, you're trying to get your internet routed through some kind of secure tunnel. Okay. What this means, you can see on this graphic here, this kind of very basic picture of an internet service provider, which is offering the internet. Then you have some kind of barrel here that's connecting your computer to a safer to the internet in a safer way. Okay, and the security concerns come into place when you have to think about that the VPN service provider itself, they will still have access to your data and the way that you're using the internet. Sometimes that is a good risk to take, given that there's so many other unsecure alternatives, and that these VPN service providers do exist because they're trying to keep you more secure. But that is something to keep in mind. But overall, you're really trying to just route your traffic through some kind of secure gateway so that it isn't just visible to be intercepted by anyone online. This is a great link to go to if you want to check out some of the best VPN services of 2020, and CNET is highly recommended, highly trusted source there. So, all right, what else here? So lock your computer when not in use. This doesn't seem as obvious, right? Coming from home, but when you're on a MacBook or you're a Windows device, what you want to do is just do a Windows L or just a quick Command Control Q. What this is going to do is, if you do have kids around, dogs, neighbors, strangers, whoever may be in your home, could have access to your device if you're leaving it open. And so this could increase your risk of just like leaving files on your desktop, different materials that you may not want someone else to have access to, or at least, even if they're not malicious, that they might do something accidental or neglectful to delete some kind of meaningful information, right?
Yeah, and I'll throw in here also that I think just getting in the habit of doing it, because obviously we all hope that this ends as quickly as it came. We're back to work, we're back to our offices, we're back to our back to Capital Factory, and this is definitely a huge risk and a huge thing that we see kind of ongoing, whether or not we're at an airport or in any kind of public setting. So if you can get in the habit of that Control L now while you're at home, you're probably going to be doing it when you go back to your office setting.
Yep. Yeah, it's absolutely to get into these good security habits, to over time, just like know what you're doing and know how to secure your devices. That's awesome. Thanks, Ashley. Tip 4 here is making sure not to transfer personal information over into a personal Dropbox or just a USB device, or maybe even off to an external drive, just because that starts to allow the work data that's so valuable to trickle out into something that can't be secured. It's kind of overreach for someone to try to protect. So on the left side, we can see some good examples, just keeping it on the work computer, keeping it on shared drives, OneDrive, G Suite, whatever you may be using, and some kind of work CMS or CRM, especially for customer data, right, that you want to protect. And then tip 5 is just to report COVID-themed scams. I kind of like to break it down in these 3 levels. Like if you think about yourself in the middle and then these concentric circles breaking out from there, like we want to share this information with our families so that when they get some kind of bad advice about trying to take advantage of the new stimulus package, you don't want them to become a victim, especially in this time. It's just going to add insult to injury. Second, here we have the workplace. So whether you may be getting some kind of phishing emails to your work device, you definitely want to report that to your security team, help desk, and they will again help to pull that out of other people's inboxes, likely, or at least send some kind of communication to say, hey, red flag, definitely watch out for this. This is not legit, and save people proactively before they do get caught with this kind of cyber virus. And then third is, if you do want to report this to the government or law enforcement, particularly for IRS, CDC, WHO impersonation schemes, here's just a few links that you can go to, numbers that you can call, people that you can talk to that really care and do want to help protect. I'm subscribed personally to a couple different government different feeds for TLP white information and above, which they want to send out to cybersecurity professionals who are trying to protect other people. And so if you do report a new scam, they'll send out a bulletin or an alert and say, hey, everybody who's signed up for this, we really need to make sure to let our users know and start securing our companies. So that helps us too. Here's a quick bonus. So with Internet of Things devices you may have at home, I don't know if you have a Nest thermostat or some kind of Roomba or a smart fridge that you talk to, but nonetheless, there are typically default credentials that come installed on those IoT devices. Admin password, whatever the username and password credentials could be. Oftentimes those are set default. And when you plug them up to the internet with those default credentials installed, we can see that cybercriminals actually do exploit those devices and take advantage of the fact that these credentials are made public in the manuals. And so what you want to do on the left here is check for new software, download new firmware, and of course, change the default credentials to something that's strong, something that's long, and something that only you know. And that's going to really help from a lot of different headaches, especially when we think about things like baby monitors and just smart security systems that are plugged in that could infringe significantly upon your family's privacy. Okay, so what if you're on the call and you're like, I'm elite and I'm a hacker, don't tread on me, okay? If you are one of those people, I'll just spend a couple seconds here. Make sure when you're investigating to think about this, what's called a pyramid of pain. So when you are looking for indicators of compromise or indicators of attack from some criminals, you want to make sure that you get higher in the level of the pyramid to make sure that you're tracking these people appropriately. My point is that at the bottom, with hash values, with IP addresses, even with domain names, they're easy for cyber criminals to change. But as you start to get higher in the pyramid when you're investigating them, you can start to see that they do use the same tools and they almost always use the same tactics, techniques, and procedures. And so if you can get up to that level, you can start to see how cyber criminals are behaving, and not just the domains and the IP addresses that they're changing. Okay. How to think, you want to try to think like a systems thinker, which again is to zoom out and say, what am I looking at here? Are these disconnected? Are they connected? Often for me, the simplest things are actually the most profound. And so if I can kind of start to see these different processes and the way things work, it helps you to go from reactive to proactive and ultimately more toward predictive, even as an organization. So, and then most important of all is to use trusted sources. As an intelligence analyst, we're as good as our sources and our methods. And so, for me on this left side are the people that I go to first. No, I'm not sponsored by any of them. But it is like they're my go-to sources.
Maybe just one.
Yeah, maybe just one. Security there. But ultimately it's the people who come out with the kind of information that you can trust. They're credible. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can certainly develop your own circle of trust. But these are great examples of executive summaries of people who are frontline leaders in trying to equip you with the information you need to step back, zoom out, and make strategic decisions that help your organization move forward. Couple other tips here are this idea of priority intelligence requirements. This happens in the military. But what you can do on the bottom here is to say, what emerging threats or vulnerabilities from the last 90 days must general end users understand, or whatever your question may be, as opposed to just going to Google and saying, what are some new threats and vulnerabilities? We like to say at Living Security, train for the next threat and not the last one. So it's all about how can we keep pace, right? If we were talking today about all the cyber hygiene tips for in the enterprise or physical devices or physical security, we're really missing the mark. But likely these new attacks that we're going to see are going to attempt to exploit people remotely. And so that's how we need to pivot, right? And ask the right questions. Any questions so far? Tyler, I'll kind of kick it over to you to see if we have any in the chat.
Not seeing anything in chat yet. If y'all want to continue on, and then we'll just save stuff for the end.
Okay, sounds good. Let's take it to the next level. I love this meme. This guy really knows what he's doing. Okay, so zooming out again, we can look that it's not just cyber hygiene that we're talking about, but ultimately that there is a lot of data in the world to protect, and that every company is actually a data company. They have some kind of intellectual property, client material, personal information, employee information, financial payment, payroll, paychecks, all of this data that we're trying to protect in addition to people. So this infographic is such a great little way to, at a glance, look at how fast this data mountain keeps growing. So just over the last 2 years alone, 90% of the data in the world was generated. And so there's this exponential, even logarithmic increase in the amount of data that we're seeing. And I don't think this is stopping anytime soon. So we put together what not to do. These are kind of the 7 deadly sins, we call them. And these are really great for end user tips. So even if you're like watching this webinar and you say, I already know this stuff, some people really don't. And it's great to share this in this kind of style so that it's It's more readily apparent. Maybe there's some kind of metaphor that we're talking about here, and it's more interesting, right? It's all about how to help get people engaged with this kind of material. So we're going to talk about misinterpreting legitimacy, reacting impulsively, and how emotions come into play here. Over relying on security controls, over sharing on social media, especially when remote, and the things that could be kind of over your shoulder, mishandling devices, neglecting suspicious activity, and ultimately just surrendering to security fatigue. So here in this first example is really where we're looking at misinterpreting legitimacy. Okay, I'm sure you've heard of phishing, and this is essentially an email that tries to persuade you to do something. It can take the form of a text message, or even some kind of phone call, which they call vishing, voice phishing. But in this case, we're looking at an email. I wonder if you can see any red flags. Ashley, can you let us know what you see here?
Yeah, that sender address looks a little off there.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit of urgency, creating some fear around being required to do something because you have blocked incoming mail.
Yep.
Yeah, and it looks like that link does not look like it's going to legitimate website either.
Yeah, there's a lot of red flags here. Yeah. We see the spoofed sender address, which is just another way to say forged, and display name. When those two are different, that's already immediately a red flag. We see a generic greeting. It just says, "Dear Outlook user." We see grammatical errors like, "Here's your incoming mails," which is not always true, but is another red flag that grammar can come into play. There's pressure to click a link or download an attachment. And upon hover, we see this super janky looking URL to browse to somewhere in Indian IP space instead of going to somewhere that looks secure or somewhere that you know is legitimate, and especially not viewing and verifying your account in this case. So I know you're all digital natives, but it's a whole new ballgame when receiving suspicious phone calls, emails, texts while you're working for a startup or a global company. It really doesn't matter. So the real world application is that the latest intelligence suggests that as phishing success decreases over time, we're going to start seeing other phishing type elements come into play: mobile, social media, even e-coms like Slack, and however else you might communicate for your business. Those become attack targets and other ways that criminals can phish people, right? So lesson one, look for red flags. You want to look for spoofed sender addresses, unnecessary urgency, and especially if you do have external tags implemented, that you just increase your level of suspicion and paranoia if that's coming from outside the organization, okay? So the next one we have here is reacting impulsively. We often see this one, and it's really dependent on how people respond intuitively. Sometimes people click on links because they're curious. Sometimes people click on links because there's an urgency to act, or maybe they feel caught off guard. And so, one of the action items here is when confronted with a new situation, it's actually okay to just stop and think and breathe. One way that I see this play out in the real world is that, when people are receiving suspicious phone calls, and it says, "Hey, this is Graham from the help desk. We've been seeing some suspicious activity on your computer. We really need you to go to logmein123.com and let me download my software onto your phone." And some people feel uncomfortable saying, like, I just don't think so. I'm going to hang up. I'm going to collect myself. Maybe call back a legitimate number that you know to be real and a number you trust. But especially just to stop and think and report something like that before you do fall for some kind of impulse, right? All right, sin 3 is over-relying on security controls. These are things like antivirus, firewalls, and other mechanisms which protect our technology devices. I think the point here is that you can feel a sense of false security with just the fact that you have an iPhone and you're trusting that the Apple developers are doing their best to secure you, which they certainly are. But ways that we can start to secure that even more is just to pause before downloading any kind of applications on your mobile phone or even applications on your laptop. But just to use an authorized app store or repository wherever possible. Sin 4 is just oversharing on social media. I think this is especially apropos for where we're at right now, and just the fact that you could be on a work call, you could be on a work Zoom, a webinar, and there could be something that's valuable to you in the background. There could be a whiteboard up with information, maybe somebody walking by in their underwear that you definitely don't want to have that kind of privacy infringement. But ultimately, the action item here is to use social media with caution and know your words will reflect back on you, your organization, your startup. So just look out for reputational type things that could cause damage. So just be cautious, especially about talking about pandemic related items or activities. Sin 5 is really mishandling devices. For me, this really comes into play again when we talked about actually locking your laptop, making sure that devices are secure. You can, again, think that you're doing the right thing by leaving it open and making sure that everything's convenient. But we sometimes need to balance convenience with security and make sure there's nothing that's potentially going to get erased, going to get changed or altered or stolen in this case with open laptops. Sin number 6 is we're looking at neglecting suspicious activity. In the workplace, that's unauthorized strangers, that's USBs left out. I think at home, this is the kind of thing where if you're seeing neighbors who are trying to get you to click on their Wi-Fi hotspots, or there's different internet connected cameras in your local community. I think as you start to identify what is your normal baseline, you can start to kind of look for things that deviate from that normal pattern and report those things, or at least be aware of those things that they could impact you and your cyber hygiene. The action item here, when in doubt, make sure to ask, okay? Oftentimes there are people who know more and also can help you. But people we've seen hesitate to just ask for help. And so, this can be a really easy, but sometimes not simple method of just connecting with people who can, help you and take care of your concerns. And last but not least is just Sin 7, surrendering to security fatigue. In this case, we have a lot of things that we talk about, and sometimes people can check out, especially if they're in the comfort of their own homes. So we like to encourage, using passphrases, which are essentially, instead of just a word that's gibberish or kind of gobbledygook, we create something that's easier to remember, but it's actually longer and stronger in that case. And you can just kind of alter, your favorite joke or maybe a song that you really like. And those things tend to be stronger than if you just create a password. We see two-factor authentication being really big, sometimes called multi-factor authentication or MFA. And this is just adding a layer or adding a step when you're trying to log into one of your applications online, maybe logging to your banking from home. And instead of just putting in a username and a password, you can get a text to add an additional code in there as an additional step. Or maybe for you, it's an application like Google Authenticator, which will give you a little 6-digit code to enter in addition to your credentials to increase your security. Ashley, have you seen other things related to security fatigue that some of our clients, maybe even at home or in the workplace?
Yeah, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about this probably here in the next slide, but just the idea of training in general. People are starting to get training fatigue. We're seeing, overusing phishing assessments, which are obviously like a critical part, or can be a critical part of a security awareness program, but people become almost like, come hardened to this and they're not paying attention. It ends up being, repeated too often. And so, it's really important from that perspective to make sure we're changing it up, getting people engaged, making it fun. We're not going to steal your thunder on this page, but I definitely add some training to that list as well.
Yeah, no, I want to bounce off you here because I think we're both, on the same page that people really need to be engaged with this material. And on the right, we actually have a picture of a lot of different clients and partners that we work with, but this is immediately following an escape room that we did on a moving trolley. And so we took generally boring cybersecurity tips and turned it into something that's fun, that's useful, that's immersive, that's engaging. And when you can high five in the name of cybersecurity, we tend to think that you're doing something right. In the case of coronavirus, when you can't high five, right, we can still at least find some way to interact and engage with one another. And so we've since launched, a digital escape room that helps to connect with people and allow them to experience some kind of team building activity online to use cybersecurity and learn cybersecurity together. Right.
Hey Grant, we just had a question come in the chat, and I thought I'd throw it over to you.
Sure.
Of just someone asking, how safe is it to log into sites with Google or LinkedIn?
How safe is it to log into sites with Google or LinkedIn? Do they mean just straight into the application? I guess we're not sure on the clarification there. Yeah. What were you saying, Tyler?
Yeah, I didn't get any clarification, but hopefully maybe they'll chat back here in a second.
Okay. Yeah, generally, it's okay to log into applications like LinkedIn or G Suite, over a trusted browser when you're connected to trusted wireless. However, what you want to try to do, especially if you're trying to protect your digital identity or professional identity on LinkedIn, or with G Suite to protect your organizational data or your email system, you do want to consider adding that additional layer that we just talked about, multi-factor authentication, which I think is a pretty easy, fairly practical way to increase security there. Hopefully that answers that question.
I think maybe then the question could have been around using your Google account to sign into like other sites or applications. And then from that perspective, it would be kind of around the site that you would be logging into, whatever that external site is. If it's trusted, do they have the proper security, standards and protocols in place as well? So, I personally don't use my Google account. Like if it's just like a random website, I'm not sure of, but there are, trusted sites that I would use my my Google account to kind of authenticate against.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's kind of unique that we're interpreting this question from a more broad strategic level, because there's other ways that we can take it too, like with password reuse. If you're reusing passwords from LinkedIn or G Suite, that's not recommended. Because once something gets hit, it could kind of increase the other areas that you do get compromised as well. But I think it comes down to what kind of risk are you willing to accept as an organization, as a person? Do you feel comfortable sharing credentials or logging into different things automatically with kind of a single sign-on solution? Or would you prefer to increase your levels of security and privacy? Sometimes, especially if you're just an individual, it's really up to you. But actually, on that note, on the left side of this page, what I call the user grid is really where we see a lot of these people kind of fall. We have this concern for convenience on the y-axis, and then on the x-axis here, we see the concern for security. And generally, people are all over this map. What we try to get to is, of course, this balance. And sometimes people can be overly security focused. But when you do balance convenience with confidentiality, with integrity of data, sometimes you can get toward the middle here and make it more of palatable solution. But I think overall here, the point is just that cybersecurity awareness is so key to protecting remote employees. I think it's even more important now with people working from home, largely working remotely, that we can learn more about these new kind of threats. We can increase our own ability to see these different COVID-themed phishing scams, share with our families, maybe even learn with some kind of fun online training solution, and ultimately, change our organization's trajectories. So, do you have anything else on this one, Ashley?
No, I mean, I think you covered a lot of it. I would say like the one thing from like any size company, obviously, but kind of the opportunity that you have being a small company, whether like it's a startup or you've been through a couple funding cycles, a couple funding rounds, but when you can build in like a positive and strong culture from the beginning, it becomes much easier than trying to change it down the road. I mean, that kind of goes for anything, like any type of culture of your organization that you're trying to build. It's easier to do it from the ground up. I think some of the things like, just even if you're not doing anything right now, you may be asking kind of where to start. And even like kind of start from the ground, from the basics, which Graham shared a lot of here. I would say, talk to your team about what data do we have? What is the classification level of that data? Like, do we know where it lives? And if you can start calling out like what data is it that like is more kind of personal to your organization? And where is it that they're going to come across it? They'll be more likely to be able to make the right choice in protecting it, even in a work from home environment. I think if you're working with your spouse, you may be crossing over each other's phone calls. So maybe there's specific like confidential information you shouldn't be talking about like in the same room, even as your spouse or or if you have your children in the room and they're on Hangouts talking to their teacher. So, I mean, some of these are just like really basic foundational things, but they're going to help you build that kind of foundational culture of security from the get-go.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, making secure choices, asking the right questions, and doing what you can. So that's really great. Here at Living Security, we try to do that. This is just a brand video. I'm not going to show it right now, but it talks about the fact that we deeply believe in securing the human, talking about the human element and how people, can learn cyber hygiene just in the same way that we can learn to wash our hands. We can also learn to set strong and secure passphrases. We can implement new kinds of security to protect our families, to protect ourselves, and ultimately protect our organizations. And so, yeah, moving on here. Let's see. Okay, so yeah, kind of the bonus. We've really touched on a lot of this embedded within the discussion, but this is kind of our last slide. That we're learning to balance cybersecurity and uptime for remote employees. It's starting to say that there's really three different elements. If you're someone who's creating a new startup or trying to survive through this coronavirus, or securing your organization, it's balancing the availability of the technology and how people can access it. It's maintaining the integrity of that data, making sure that it remains intact from point A to point B securely, often encrypted. And then the third element is the confidentiality. How can we make sure that it stays secure? And I love this graph because in the middle it just says information security, but it's really about blending technology and people to work together. Like when you have human in the loop systems where people are putting inputs into great technology, we're going to have the best solutions possible. And then again, on the right, just like to understand risk, sometimes isn't a bad thing. There can be good types of risk, but there's definitely bad risk. And in this case, when we're working remotely, a bad risk is just accepting that everyone's going to take security seriously. And so, thinking about a way to make that fun, doing some kind of online team building activity, or even computer-based training is such a great way to put the right foot forward and make sure that you're protecting your organization. So here's a great podcast. I just wanted to like do a quick little spot, that Farnham Street blog or FS.blog. It's coming from a former Canadian intelligence officer, and they talk so much in-depth, rich topics that go into coronavirus in this case, and other topics like decision intelligence and cybersecurity that can really help us to better understand, especially if you're entrepreneurial and you just want to really dig into the meat and potatoes. Here's the references, and I think that's really all there is. So feel free to look us up, Living Security, or look me up on LinkedIn. Thank you so much, Ashley, for joining. Love, just hearing your perspective on staying agile and how our organizations can meet this crazy new threat and actually succeed.
Thanks for having me, Graham. Awesome job, great information, and I know you'd love to connect with anybody that has more questions. The same for me as well. Tyler, thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much. Always a pleasure to have both of you. This was a great presentation. Really enjoyed it. Let's see. We'll maybe give a moment if anyone wants to throw a question in the Q&A before we jump off.